Summon the Gods by Melinda Kucsera, Book 2 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy.
Part 8, Chapter 30, Dreams and Doppelgangers. Ivarian rose at the sound of his name and shoved aside the blanket covering him. "I'm over here."
"There you are. Help me with her. She's not as light as a feather."
Rand rounded another blanket draped over two chairs to form someone else's sleeping nook. Ivarian froze. Rosalie lay motionless across Rand's extended arms as he hurried toward him. What happened? Ivarian rushed forward to help. What should he do?
"I don't know. She was fine. And then she dropped to the ground. I can't wake her."
Rand glanced around for somewhere to put her. "Lay her down here." Ivarian gestured to the chair he just vacated.
"Thanks."
Rand bent and Rosalie slid from his arms. By some miracle, she stayed on the chair and didn't slide off.
"Will you watch over her?"
Rand backed away. Ivarian picked up the blanket he discarded and draped it over Rosalie. Of course. What was she doing before she collapsed? Rand's story didn't make sense. How could Rosalie just collapse? She was so strong. What did Rand talk her into doing? Probably something involving magic.
"That's the weird thing. She wasn't doing anything, except following us."
Rand shrugged as he backed further away.
"Rand, where are you?"
Moren shouted from somewhere else in the library. "How convenient."
"I'll be right there. Look after her. I need to see what my uncle needs."
Rand ducked between two shelves crammed with books and fled. What was he hiding? Ivarian tugged first one of Rosalie's hands out from under the blanket and turned it over, then the other. But there were no scratches on her palms or cuts, so perhaps she didn't use any blood magic. It struck him again as he replaced her hands under the blanket that he didn't know her all that well. But Rand knew her. He had plenty of time to get to know her while I searched for my uncle. I should have stayed here. I would have accomplished more than I did in the past. Ivarian scrubbed both hands over his face and tried to swallow the bitter regret burning his throat. I should get to know her and leave the past in the past. Who knows how much time we have left anyway. We should look toward the future and build what life we can in this broken world. Ivarian sat on the arm of the chair and rested his elbows on his knees and his chin on his fist. He was useless here, but Rand wasn't. No, Rand was a powerful mage, and he'd find some way to keep them all alive, even if that meant spending all the wishes he had on that one task. Rand would do it, and Rosalie would probably help him. She wouldn't sit around and wait for the demons to break through or for the food to run out. I should help too. After all, I'm a demigod. But that status didn't confer any extra strength or skills on him. What could I do to help? I can just travel backward in time, but that wasn't a useful gift. So he sat there and watched over Rosalie instead. After all, Rand asked him to do that. It didn't feel like enough, but what else could he do except wait for her to wake up?
Meanwhile,
"You've got to be better than this if you want to get your daughter back,"
Mom said in that critical tone Rosalie knew so well. I must be dreaming. Rosalie stood in another tunnel under Mount Eredron. The place had way too many of them, in her opinion, and there wasn't much to differentiate this one from the others, but that might be because she wasn't looking for distinguishing features. Instead, her gaze caught on a woman with shoulder-length brown hair half falling out of a braid that valiantly tried to confine it. The woman wore that padded jacket thing called a brigandine that had scales sewn into it. It was blood red, Mom's favorite color. The woman wearing it edged the toe of her boot under a stick, then flung it upward, and Mom caught it. She spun the staff once to let the man wearing Ranger greens know she'd parry whatever he threw at her. Mom never once glanced away from him, and he glared at her like she did something to offend him. Mom probably had. Her adversaries didn't call her a battle axe for no reason. She could be pretty abrasive when she wanted to, and Rosalie wouldn't be surprised if her mom did anger the Ranger. What did you do, Mom? And why was she picking fights with the Rangers? Mom used to be one.
"What happened?"
Mom demanded as two men rounded opposite sides of an open barrel that had spears sticking out of it, bringing the number of combatants to 3.
"My father is a ranger,"
Mom said as she dropped into a guard position. A green glow rose from her wrist. So Mom did know something about those magical strings. This isn't a memory. In my first real memory of my mom, she looked older than this, and I can't time travel on my own. This could be a dream, but that crystal shard she found affected time. Rosalie dug her hand into her pocket, then froze as someone spoke with her voice. But her mouth didn't move.
"Don't hurt my mommy. She's a good person."
I didn't say that. Truthfully, she was more worried Mom would beat the two men to a pulp before they knew what hit them. Rosalie glanced around as Mom, the tunnel, and the two men vanished, leaving the barrel of spears behind.
"Is she, though? Maybe Maybe the version of her you knew was, but the one I knew wanted only to make a name for herself. She didn't want to be saddled with a child so young.
A woman who looked like her appeared behind the barrel, and she ran a hand up the wooden shaft of a spear. Who are you really? You're either a shape-shifting demon or... Rosalie stared at the woman who wore her face.
Or what?
Her doppelganger raised an eyebrow in inquiry. Or you're a version of me from another timeline. You found one of these crystals too. Rosalie pulled out the crystal shard and held it up. It didn't look like any type of Lumiere crystal she'd ever seen. It was opaque and grayish, but Sarn was one of the best at identifying stones. If he said it was a Lumiere crystal, then it was.
What is that?
Her doppelganger walked through the barrel and it vanished, taking the spears with it. Perhaps this was a dream. Just a weird rock I found. I thought it might have some power, but it doesn't. Rosalie shoved it back into her skirt pocket and hoped the woman bought her lie. If that doppelganger didn't use the crystal to come and bother her, then she must have a time walker with her. You didn't come alone.
Nope. I brought a friend.
Her doppelganger snapped her fingers. Evarian appeared, but this version of him had a cruel twist to his lips as he scowled at her. His eyes glowed around the edges and darkness swirled in the center of where his pupils should be, pulling that light inward, forming a tunnel. Rosalie fell as that darkness spun around her. What are you doing to me? She touched her forehead as she swayed. Did they come to replace her and the real Evarian? I can't let them. They might hurt him or Ran or his uncle for fun. Not on my watch. No one hurts my friends and gets away with it. Rosalie clenched her fists and her nails bit into her palms, and the pain made the doppelgangers grow fuzzy around the edges. Perhaps this was a dream after all. If it is a dream, then I can wake up any time I want. Rosalie willed herself to wake up.
That's not why we came. We're not monsters.
Evarian's double glanced away, but not before she saw the hurt in his eyes.
He's right,
said her double, as the woman strode toward her with her hands extended to show they were empty. Rosalie flinched when her double grabbed her forearm and pulled her up.
Will you stop that? We didn't come to hurt you.
Her doppelganger shook her. Then why did you come? Rosalie let her double pull her to her feet.
To talk to you. We can't go back in time anymore. The reasons aren't important, but I'll tell you anyway, because if you're at all like me, then you won't listen unless I do.
Her doppelganger glowered at her, like that was her fault. You can't visit the same time period twice if you spent any length of time there, Rosalie guessed. Evarian might have said something about that, or maybe it was his aunt. All this talk of time travel ran together in her mind, but that made sense. Time slowed to a crawl, and the copies of her and Evarian froze like forgotten dolls. Voices spoke just out of earshot. Judging by the timbre and tone, Evarian and Ran were arguing about something. Not the Evarian lurking behind her doppelganger, but the real one. What were they arguing about? I'd better find out. Rosalie sighed and willed herself to wake up and open her damned eyes. When she did, the library's ceiling appeared far overhead, lit by clusters of Lumiere crystals. What are you two arguing about? Rosalie glared at them as she sat up. Hunger throbbed in her belly and an ache stabbed her neck. She rubbed it as she waited for an answer.
I just stopped by to see how you are. How you feeling?
Ran folded his arms, but he shifted his weight from foot to foot like a guilty child. He probably wanted to try again to reach the farm. How dire was their food situation? Well, there was one way to find out. I'm hungry, but otherwise I'm fine. Rosalie recalled their descent, then all that crazy stuff with her doppelganger, but not how she got from deep under the mountain back to the library. Am I losing my mind? Probably not. What happened? One moment I'm following you, then I wake up with a crick in my neck. Hungry enough to eat a horse? Rosalie wouldn't actually eat a horse, but anything else was fair game.
I don't know what happened. When we realized you weren't behind us, we turned around and found you on the ground. Did you faint? I don't think you could have hit your head on anything since the ceiling and the bottom of the longest stalactites were way above my head, and I'm taller than you, so if I was in no danger of hitting my head, then you were in even less danger of that.
Ran leaned against the end of a shelving unit full of books, and it didn't capsize.
Where did you go with him? He won't tell me.
Evarian pointed an accusatory finger at Ran. Ran looked at her and tried to do that thing where he raised one brow, but he couldn't quite get that to work, so he just looked silly. Maybe that was the point, because Evarian laughed.
Why won't you tell me?
Evarian sat on a crate like his legs couldn't hold him up anymore. Hopefully that was because he was laughing at the funny faces Rand was now making on purpose. Because there's nothing to tell. We looked around outside the library, and then I woke up here, but we didn't run into any demons. And they could discuss this while she ate something. Is there anything to eat? Please tell me there's something, or I might have to eat my boots. I'd rather not do that, since shoes will be hard to come by for a while, especially with everyone stuck in the library.
Yes, there is something to eat. Neryl's mom and some other folks who actually know how to cook things that don't taste terrible are helping Uncle Mirren ration the food food and provide enough edible meals for everyone. I'll just go get you some.
Rand made like his nickname and ran deeper into the library to fetch that and escape the conversation.
Is that really what you were doing?
Ivarian studied her. Yes, it was. Rosalie smoothed the wrinkles from her skirt. Why was he acting like this? I don't belong to him, nor do I need his permission to do anything. I'm my own person. Besides, Rand was like a brother to her, and Ivarian ditched her plenty of times to run around the timeline. Did he expect her to sit here and do nothing while he recuperated? Because that wouldn't happen. She was a woman of action, just like her mother. Sitting here and waiting would drive her nuts if she didn't do something, especially if there was something she could do. Thankfully, Rand didn't see her as an ornamental doll he could sit on a shelf, but he had a sister and an outspoken aunt, and they trained him to think of women as independent, powerful people who could make their own decisions. Did Ivarian mention having any siblings? She couldn't remember. Too much happened too quickly. Ivarian sighed and ran a hand through his white hair.
Why didn't he just tell me that? He was cagey, so I thought something else was going on.
What did you think was going on? Rosalie picked at a mark on her skirt.
You know, Rand is...
Ivarian trailed off and gestured to where Rand stood a few moments before. Handsome, fun-loving, upbeat, friendly, and powerful? Rosalie suggested as she studied Ivarian, and he winced.
Yeah, he's that all right, and I'm not.
Ivarian shrugged helplessly.
Oh, you say the nicest things about me.
Rand preened as he stepped around the rucksacks and things strewn about the floor, while holding a large bowl. You also don't know when to shut up. Rosalie reached for the bowl.
I've been accused of that on occasion, and Dad would totally agree with you. I have fond memories of him shushing me when I tried to ask questions when we were supposed to be hiding or spying. I hated all that skulking about, but it suited him. Dad needed to know what he was up against before he did anything. I loved him to pieces, but that drove me crazy.
Rand let her take the bowl. He was a careful man, and you're careful with your magic too. Don't pretend you aren't. And they'd gotten off track somehow. Rosalie inhaled the scent of something mashed up with spices. Anyway, Rand is the brother I never had.
And Rosalie is like the sister I already have, but she's stuck on some other timeline with my dad. At least that's Uncle Mirren's theory. I'm quite jealous of that, truth be told. Why do we have to deal with demons and they don't?
Rand folded his arms again. I don't know, but she was growing more certain that the answer was in an event that happened 20 years ago. Not 16 like she originally thought. Rosalie rested the bowl on her thigh and lifted a spoonful to her lips. Rand was almost a year older than her. How far back could he remember? Do you know when my mom and your dad first met? Because they already knew each other when you and I met as kids. Rosalie blew on the spoonful of mashed something. Potatoes, maybe? Looking back at that memory now, she couldn't help but notice how awkward it was for Sarn. He stood behind Rand, keeping his talkative son in between him and Mom like a little human shield. And he'd let Rand ramble on, telling his entire life story. Rand was happy to tell it, too. In fact, she couldn't remember seeing Sarn without Rand or his daughter, nor did she recall him saying much during that visit. That wasn't unusual. Sarn was quiet and introverted, but Rand was the complete opposite, and he was always willing to speak for his taciturn father.
I don't know, but Uncle Myron will. Do you want me to ask him?
Rand jerked his thumb at the aisle between two bookshelves behind him.
No need, I'm here. My nephew forgot to bring you something to drink. You must be parched after sleeping for so long.
Mirren stepped out of a different aisle holding a cup of water.
Hey, I only have 2 hands, and I needed both to carry the bowl.
Rand pointed at the bowl on her lap. Thank you. Rosalie reached for the cup when Mirren drew near enough to hand it to her. She sipped the cool water. How long did I sleep for?
3 days?
Ivarian said, and that explained their concern. When did my mom and your brother first meet? Rosalie spooned some of the mash into her mouth. It wasn't potato, though, since it had a nutty flavor. Was it some kind of ground-up nut? It tasted like cinnamon and nuts, not an unpleasant flavor, just not what she expected. But it was warm, and she was hungry, so she ate as she waited for Mirren to answer her.
They met when you and my nephew were babies.
Mirren stared off like he was reliving that meeting.
I think you told me about this when I was little, but I don't remember the story.
Rand leaned against the end of a bookcase, crossed his ankles, and settled in to listen. How did they meet? Rosalie prompted, since Mirren fell silent. What didn't he want to tell them?
Chapter 31. Slow Collapse. Layla sat cross-legged on the cot in her cell and concentrated on the dark fabric of the hidden world. It wasn't really fabric, but dark magic practitioners used that metaphor for ages to visualize the unseen. It made working with that medium easier and reminded users that every action had a reaction. That wasn't always the case with light magic. Where are you? Time crystals warped space and time, and that affected the unseen. So she should should sense where the fabric of the unseen curved around it. The morning star wasn't the trusting sort, so he'd keep the time crystal close. He might even wear it. Since no rumor mentioned what a time crystal might look like, he could wear it in public and no one would know. He'd enjoy that. How can I find it when I don't know what a time crystal looks like or how it would affect the unseen? All I have are guesses based on old rumors, and those rumors were older than she was. But she ran her mental hands over every inch of the unseen around her and noted every dip and fold. The door to her cell creaked open, and she let go of the unseen. It fell away like a shroud, releasing her sight. The dim cell filled her sight in place of the darkness of the unseen. A fallen angel strode toward her, arrogance written in her every line as she sneered at Layla. Perhaps I can find the time crystal another way. Layla rose and held her wrists out so the pretentious fallen angel could clap the manacles around her wrists again. Maybe her boss wanted to gloat? The fallen angel spun on her heel, so the chain connected to the manacles rested on her shoulder. Then she strolled out without a backward glance or a word exchanged, as if it were beneath her to speak to Layla. We'll see how you do when I'm not wearing infernal chains. Layla let the fallen angel's impertinence go. It wasn't worth the effort to correct her. Instead, she trudged, head down, behind the wingless fallen angel. The woman wore a backless bronze dress that ended at the tops of her thighs, showing off the scars from where her wings were amputated by divine retribution and a lot of lightning. Layla glanced away, unable to bear looking at those scars. Once she had wings too, but that was long ago.
You can't hide from me forever,
said the angel she once was.
Nor can you suppress me forever. I will escape and take my rightful place again.
Not in your wildest dreams. That won't ever happen. Layla ignored the glares of the angel reflected in every shiny surface she passed. Why did the morning star have to decorate his palace with so many mirrors? Couldn't he admire himself in his own quarters? Layla fixed her eyes on the marble floor as they exited a staircase into a hall of goddamned mirrors, stretching from the floor to the ceiling. In every single one, that damned angel stood, her black hair blowing in the wind that billowed her white robes. As she pointed at Layla,
someone will wake me up. Your days are numbered. You'd better make them count.
Layla ignored the threat and the reflection. I'm a goddess. That angel is a figment of my imagination. Layla squared her shoulders. Ahead, the mirrors ended, and the hallway changed to all marble.
You wish I were a hallucination, but I'm not, and I'm coming for you.
The angel stepped out of the mirrors, and 12 copies of her surrounded Layla.
You can't suppress me forever.
The mirrors changed to show the glowing eye of the gateway as a metal angel strode through a tunnel of light away from it. That's an agent of order? Layla stared. She never thought she'd ever see one.
Indeed. Look what I took from it.
The 12 copies of the sleeping angel held up a crystal as the agent of order fell, and the same angel that surrounded her climbed off its back in the mirrors, leaving a ragged hole behind. Is that a time crystal? Layla reached for it as the copies disappeared, leaving one angel behind.
Reunite with me, and you can have it.
The angel closed her fist around the smoky gem and vanished as she turned her back on Layla.
You know where to find me.
What if I don't? What will you do next? The chain connected to the manacles yanked Layla forward and away from this madness. A laugh answered her question. Why was I talking to her? I shut her away. But Layla shivered, even though it wasn't cold. How could a part of her soul that she sheared off long ago attack someone? She has no matter. She's just a spirit.
So are you. Angels are made of spirit and light.
Taunted the part of her she got rid of.
You can't change your essential nature. Only your creator can.
Was that true? Had nothing she did changed her? Layla pushed that aside as the hallway ended at stairs leading down to a set of doors. The morning star held one open. A smile turned up his full lips.
It's a beautiful day to collapse time down to a single point, don't you think?
On his head sat an iron crown with 13 points, with a gray crystal shard inset in each one. He wore a red robe with a long sword belted around his waist. A red, tear-shaped stone winked at her from the hilt, and it matched the red velvet cap the crown sat on. Is that your plan? Layla took the stairs one at a time. If she could delay him even a little, perhaps someone could stop him. He caught her arm as she drew even with him, and she staggered as he siphoned her energy, all while smiling that infernal smile, like this was the greatest day of his life.
Some say revenge is best served cold, but I disagree. I think it's best served hot enough to destroy all creation. With enough pressure, all things collapse. collapse and burn.
The morning star strolled away from his palace, taking a cobbled pathway that headed for the wrought iron gates surrounding his property. Someone shoved skulls onto the spikes along the top of the 13-foot-tall gates, and they grinned down at her. He really was the adversary of all life.
Wake me up. Let me return. Alone, you're half the angel you once were, and you're no match for him,
whispered the sleeping angel as the chariot waiting beyond the gates neared. No, I gave you up to become a goddess, and I don't want you back. I'm so much more than you now. Layla straightened her spine and held her head high, her nose in the air. She wouldn't give the adversary any hint of how hard it was to walk in a straight line when all hell kept swinging back and forth, making her dizzy. But that was his doing. Hell wasn't actually moving, and neither was the ground. The gates opened, and the giant fiery cats hitched to it glared at them. But the morning star just stepped into the chariot and pulled her up beside him. The cats took off, pulling the chariot onto a street. Ahead, the gateway split into 3 copies of itself, then flickered and collapsed into one as they headed right for it. Behind them, fallen angels streamed out of buildings and wherever else they were hiding, and they fell into step, following them.
Layla,
said another female voice, but this time it wasn't her alter ego. It was Rosalie. Where are you? Layla couldn't believe it. She lost touch with that girl a while ago and couldn't reach her again.
Back in my own time, but I think I'm losing my mind.
Rosalie sounded pretty calm for a woman fearing for her sanity.
I keep seeing a copy of myself and now I'm hallucinating about my mom.
Layla knew what that was like, but admitting that wouldn't make Rosalie feel any better. She leaned into the waist-high cab as dizziness assaulted her again. She couldn't get lucky enough to fall out of the chariot, not with the adversary holding tightly to her forearm.
Am I losing my mind? Or am I dealing with a copy of myself from a different timeline that somehow crossed over with mine? God, that sounds so insane.
Rosalie sounded serious and a little lost. No pictures came with her mind voice, and that was probably for the best, since Layla needed to focus. Anything is possible with time crystals in play. They warp space and time in ways I don't understand, so you're probably not losing your mind. Not any more than you were when you talked to a snake. Layla grinned and suppressed a laugh. They were created in the beginning, when time began. That's all anyone is sure of. The rest is speculation. Layla straightened up as Rosalie's tone registered. She wasn't asking an idle question. No, Rosalie had seen one. Layla would bet her existence on it. Where did you see a time crystal? Dare she hope the girl had one?
I took a crystal from a demon, and then time froze for everyone around me. Time moved normally only for my friend and I. We weren't affected.
That sounds like a time crystal to me. Where did you find it? Layla wished time would slow down, but the chariot raced on, leaving her wish unfulfilled.
I'm back in my time. I took it from a demon that exited a portal. Why do you ask? Is this crystal important?
Rosalie must already know the answer to that. Now she was fishing for information, and Layla didn't blame her. Why would the jerk holding her captive right now send demons to Rosalie's time? The answer struck her hard as the chariot stopped.
It's a beautiful day to collapse time down to a single point,
her captor said before they left. He couldn't. It wasn't possible. She glanced over her shoulder anyway, already dreading what she would see. But there they were, marching to their doom. All the ex-gods who could create the gravity needed to pull the shards of the time crystals scattered about space and time to one place, and they would drag everything around them along in their wake, collapsing all creation into a molten ball. That can't be his entire plan, but it was terrifying enough. She reached out for Rosalie's mind and hoped the miracle that connected them worked its magic again because she was too drained to find the girl. What could she tell her? The adversary needed to collect the time crystals scattered across all creation for his plan to work. If I'm right about his plan, there was a chance she was wrong. Where could I tell her to take the shards she finds? How could anyone stop him? The adversary gazed down at her with the same glowing violet eyes of the prince of angels he once was, but there was only cruel mockery there. He stepped off the chariot and pulled her down after him.
Come and see what my dark deeds have done.
She wanted to shout at him and tell him he'd never win, but the words stuck in her throat, because the only way he'd lose was if all the shards of the time crystals disappeared from all creation before he could set his plan into motion, but that might destroy everything. He turned and waved to the fallen angels behind them.
Maybe you're okay with giving up and handing him all creation on a flaming platter, but I won't,
said the sleeping angel. It's over. We lost. There's nothing anyone can do to stop this. Layla hunched her shoulders, hating that she lost before she had a chance to fight, but the facts stood against her.
No, it's not over. I have allies, and they will stop this. yes, but you need to stall him,
was the surprising answer from her other half. How do you have anyone? I locked you away. Layla raised her head and regarded the ghost of her former self, standing on the roof of a building overlooking the intersection where the gateway flickered. That ghostly angel pointed at something, but Layla couldn't make it out. Hope burned in her chest that whatever her alter ego pointed at could help. She'd take help from any quarter right now.
Chapter 32, Race Against Time.
Turn your thoughts away from that gateway. Going through that thing is a death sentence,
said the demoness not that long ago, and her warning echoed as Garen turned a bend, then another one, and ran down a street parallel to the one Arginil, Natalie, and Thaniel trod. Was she right? Maybe, but that gateway's my ticket out of hell. I can't pass that up, but he'd have to if he didn't reach it before Arginil laid his glowing eyes on that thing and turned his gift loose on it. I must cross through it before that happens. Garen gritted his teeth and ran as fast as he could, not caring if anyone heard his footfalls. Right now, he needed speed, not stealth. I must reach that gateway first. The rumble of thunder snapped his attention back to the street ahead, but it wasn't thunder because there weren't any clouds in the dusky orange sky. I know that sound. It was the beat of many feet marching in time. Why is there another army between me and the gateway? Garen almost threw his head back and laughed at the irony of his situation. But if he did that, he'd have to slow down. No way would he stop. Not when there was a chance he could still beat that army to the gateway. Who led this army? And how did they assemble it so quickly? Did they round up the demons that were part of the army that ran away from the library? Or did another one march here from somewhere else in hell? Perhaps I should find out. Curiosity nibbled at the back of his mind. I could claim this new army. Garen slapped himself. No. I need to get out of hell first. Then I can find an army to lead. Oh, how he craved that. Where is this army, I hear? So far, it wasn't marching down this street, but there were at least 10 blocks between him and the gateway. They could be marching right now down one of them, or any of the blocks behind him. Garen pumped his arms, but that didn't help him run faster. If the army cut him off, he still had options. I could fall in line at the end of the last column and hope nobody notices me while I talk to the recruits and find out who's leading them. They wouldn't think anything of him, since he still wore the illusion of a demon. But what goes on must eventually come off, so the illusion must have a way to remove it. It might expire from the space between him and its maker. Maybe the army will march right into the gateway. That would be ideal, actually. Then he could march through the gateway with all the other demons and claim it on the other side. Will my powers return when I leave hell? That question stopped him in his tracks. What if leaving here doesn't restore me to my former glory? The gateway glowed in the middle of an intersection many blocks ahead, and it seemed to extend brilliant arms as if it were reaching for him. Millions of voices called for a leader to gather them into an armed resistance, and it was the most glorious sound he'd heard in a very long time. But he probably imagined that too. If going through that thing doesn't undo what this place did to me, I'll still be better off than I am here. An orange glow to his left made him turn his head and stare at a chariot pulled by giant flaming cats, and they growled at him too. Garen pushed himself to run faster. Behind that chariot marched rank upon rank of fallen angels, not demons, making his disguise useless. No way could he blend in with them now. And I left the only one who could pass for a fallen angel many blocks behind. When fate had a laugh at his expense, it did so with gusto. God damn it, couldn't you have waited a few more minutes to show up? Now he was in a race against time to reach the gateway before that chariot. He couldn't see who stood in its cab since the firecats were as large as horses and they obstructed his view, but he could guess at the man's identity. There was only one creature in hell that was ostentatious enough to travel like that, the Prince of Hell himself. The need for revenge burned in his gut like Garen had swallowed a fireball, but now wasn't the time. The gateway was a block away and closing. He'd reach it first if he didn't do anything stupid like turn around and challenge the adversary, the Morning Star, or whatever he was calling himself these days. Don't do it, Garen told himself as his steps slowed. You can't defeat him, not without most of your powers. Even if he had all his powers, he didn't know if he could beat the most powerful angel that ever existed. He tricked me into fighting his war for him, and he must answer for that. Garen stopped in front of the gateway. Before he could turn and face the author of all his miseries, the sleeping angel appeared in front of him. Her glowing violet eyes beseeched him as she extended her hands toward him.
Go now before he reaches you.
I can't. This is a matter of honor. Garen clenched his fists and turned his back on her and the gateway.
If you want revenge, then take it. Hit him where it will hurt the most.
Garen glanced at her over his shoulder. Where's that? He doesn't care about anyone. Not that he'd ever heard, but everyone loved someone.
Stop his plans from succeeding. That's how you hurt him.
The sleeping angel pointed at the gateway, but that was a bold idea, and he liked that. How do I do that when I don't know what his plans are? Garen approached her. She stood just outside the gateway, and it pulled on her long black hair.
With this.
She produced a gray crystal from inside her sleeve, and the army's footsteps ceased. Silence fell. Even the fire cats and their chariot froze. What is that, and why aren't we affected by it? Garen reached for the rock. She pulled her hand back, taking it out of his reach.
It's a time crystal. I don't know how much time this buys us, so listen up. He plans to use these to destroy all time and existence too, since they're tied together, and these crystals are part of his plan.
How do I stop him? Do I need to gather all these crystals and take them somewhere? Garen didn't like the sound of that. It would probably require him to sneak around, and he hated that. But if it would hurt his enemy, then maybe he could stand it for a little while.
He plans to pull all the shards of this crystal to him, and they'll pull whatever is within their radius. That's his plan. You'll have to figure out how to stop it on your own.
The sleeping angel grabbed the front of his tunic and flung him into the gateway. Light blinded him as he crossed its threshold. Well, that was one way to enter a gateway. Garen rose and dusted himself off, even though there wasn't anything on his clothes except an illusion.
Go now. You must reach the other side before he does what he's planning.
You should change your name to the bossy angel. Okay. I'm going. I don't want to get stuck in there. That would just be horrifying. So Garen ran through the tunnel of light and didn't stop until the light ahead changed to darkness. Garen stepped out of the gateway into a gray, misty plain that stretched on for what seemed like forever. But he punched the sky because he did it. I finally left hell.
Why are you cheering? People don't normally do that when they arrive here. This isn't a vacation spot.
I know that voice. Garen turned left and glared at the last person he expected to see in the gray between. Oh God, no, not him again. Why did you steal that spell from me? Ithaglir folded his arms over his beaded, old-fashioned robes.
I needed it. Thanks for finding it.
The gall of that man. Garen fought the urge to cuss out his cousin. It wouldn't do any good anyway. The X-Time god never heard anything except what he wanted to hear. What are you doing here?
Do you miss the old days when they revered and feared us?
Ithaglir gazed at the fog bank creeping toward them like it was the most interesting thing he ever saw. Maybe it was. Time gods were weird, and he was the weirdest one of them all. What are you talking about? Those days ended a long time ago. Garen rubbed the bridge of his nose where a headache threatened to split his head open, but his hand didn't encounter the illusion, so it must have disappeared while he ran through the magical tunnel someone built between the gateway in hell and the one here, in this blasted gray place. And truth be told, he wasn't all that sorry those old days ended. He was a man of war, not someone who wanted to be worshipped.
I didn't choose a side in the war against heaven. My sisters pledged their lives to the Creator, and I followed them. I knew Faye would pick the right side since she can see the future.
Ithaglir must be talking to himself, but why did he want to rehash ancient history? So what? Do you want to pick a side now? You're thousands of years too late to make any kind of difference. We lost. Heaven won. Everyone who fought on the wrong side went to hell. Why are you dwelling on this now? Garen studied the ex-god of time. Did his cousin go mad? That happens sometimes. Long life wasn't the blessing people thought it was. Sometimes it was a curse.
What if there was a way to bring those days back? Would you help me do it?
Ithaglir whispered like he feared someone would overhear them, but there was no one here except them and miles of gray nothingness under a gray sky. Hell was more cheerful than this place. I think you've gone crazy. The long years of your life have warped your mind. The old days are gone, but we can make the days stretching out before us better if we choose to. Garen towed the fog, climbing his legs. The ground was dusty underneath, and it shifted about at his lightest touch. He couldn't run on it unless he wanted to fight for every step forward.
So you'll help me?
Ithaglir fixed his silver eyes on him, and they were as clear and as calm as a still pool on a cloudy day. Does helping you involve helping the adversary or the morning star or whatever he's calling himself today? Because if so, that was an instant no. There was no way he'd ever fight on the side of any fallen angels ever again, and that went double for their infernal leader.
No, I'm working with someone else.
Ithaglir stuffed his hands into his pockets like he was searching for something. What does your ally want? Garen closed his eyes as the wind kicked up a plume of gray dust and flung it in his face. Please don't say world domination, or I'll punch you in the face.
No, nothing so grand as that. All they want is chaos.
Ithaglir removed a gray rock from his pocket and examined it. Is that a time crystal? Garen grabbed it and turned his body away to block any reprisals so he could examine the stone.
No, time crystals don't exist. Hey, I need that. Give that back to me.
Ithaglir tried to grab it, but Garen spun, and the blonde ex-god slammed into his back. Yeah, well, apparently they exist. Garen tossed the rock and caught it before his cousin could. I'd better hold on to this for now.
Then you'll help me?
Ithaglir straightened his robes. I never said that, and you still haven't told me what you needed a summoning spell for. Garen pocketed the rock. Maybe it was a time crystal, but maybe it wasn't. He didn't know how to tell one way or the other.
To get me out of here,
Said a familiar voice that Garen couldn't place before something hard slammed into his back. Muscular arms, covered in gray fur, wrapped around his belly as the man bore him down into the dust and the fog. Antlers grazed the back of his head. Which ex-god had antlers? It was probably a god of the hunt, but he couldn't recall any of their names as he struggled to throw the furry guy off him.
Get the crystal, it's in his pocket.
Ithaglir said, and he sounded gleeful, that lout. He always preferred to get others to fight for him. Why do you want the crystal back? It doesn't look like anything special. Garen tried to roll over and dump the ex-god of the hunt off his back, but each try caused those antlers to strike the sides of his head. Garen might be tougher and more durable than a human, but a hard enough strike to the head would knock him out, and his attacker knew it. The guy slammed his forehead into the back of Garen's head, and pain wrapped fiery hands around the spot. But Garen stayed conscious as he pushed up to his hands and knees. The fool still had his arms wrapped around him and had hoped his body weight would keep Garen on the ground. No bloody way. I threw down demons who weighed more than this idiot. The fool kept trying to flatten him, but that only worked before because he had surprise and momentum on his side. Was that the only move he knew? The ex-god of the hunt sprang back, and his weight disappeared. Garen rose as the deer man brandished a gray rock, and he remembered the ex-god's name finally. He was called Jannari, and he led a pack of shape-shifting weirdos who went feral and decided their half-human, half-animal form was their true form. They were called the Wild Hunt. Or something like that. Hey, I stole that first. Garen reached for the crystal and missed when Jannari jumped back. Ithaglir teleported so close to Jannari they could have kissed. The ex-time god grabbed the crystal and teleported away, leaving them glaring at each other.
Are you working for
him? They both asked at the same time, as they pointed at where the man in question stood before he disappeared. Hell no. He's caused me no end of trouble. Garen stomped on the dust and the fog that now came up to his knees. Are you working for him? Jannari laughed, and his braying laughter grated on Garen's nerves. The question wasn't that funny. Garen folded his arms. There was nowhere to go, since he couldn't teleport anymore. That was stripped from him, along with most of his godhood, and coming here didn't fix that. Anyone who came through the gateway would see him from miles away, so there was no point leaving the gateway. But he couldn't see the ground. What were the chances that some time crystals lay hidden under the fog?
You're right.
Are you working for him? Garen asked again, as someone groaned. He caught Jannari's green eyes, and at the ex-god's nod, they crept around the gateway, giving it a wide berth. On the ground behind it, an insectoid, human-like creature wearing White Angel's robes lay, half-conscious on the ground. So this was the person who created the gateway, and the longer it stayed open, the more it drained its creator. Already the fellow turned as gray as this place, and his skin flaked off as if the gateway were devouring him from the inside out.
What the hell is this?
Jannari pushed on the pathetic creature with the edge of his cloven hoof. He's the creator of that gateway, and his essence is maintaining it. Garen backed away, since there wasn't anything he could do for the guy. If you play with dangerous magic, you risk destroying yourself. Too bad you learned that lesson too late to do much good. Geraint shook his head. He shouldn't be surprised that there were fools among the angels too, but he was. He thought the Creator endowed them with more intelligence than that. After all, Arginil and Thaniel weren't fools, but perhaps they weren't representative of their race. You didn't answer my question.
No, I'm not working with him. How can I when I'm stuck here?
Gennari spread his furry arms to make his point, and then a voice shouted his name.
Garen, god of war, I call you. The circle binds you to this time and place. You must come.
A woman said as green light wrapped around him and blotted out the gray between worlds. Perhaps I don't need to teleport. Not when a woman was willing to use the summoning spell Hithaglir stole. I wonder who he gave it to. I guess I'll find out soon enough. Garen thought nothing else for a while as his body broke apart, so it could sail across space and maybe time too on a green beam of light carried by a spell he found in a library in hell. He would have laughed if he could have at the irony of that summoning happening after he left hell, but he was in too many pieces to do anything except black out until the spell reassembled him before whoever had summoned him.
Chapter 33. Who are you? Arginil stopped at the next intersection. The gateway glowed somewhere ahead, but it was too far away to guess how many intersections stood between him and it. More than likely, Thaniel would be fine. But what if something went wrong? Natali could have bewitched her. The thought of that made him collapse against the side of a building and laugh until he couldn't breathe. He just couldn't picture that happening. Besides, Natali might be a demon, but they did everything they could to help him. And truth be told, they were much more helpful than Garen was. I still can't leave them like this. Arginil shoved his dark hair out of his eyes, but the wind blew it into his face when he turned back. A low rumble signaled something headed this way. Who was coming?
You know who. The adversary, the morning star, or whatever you want to call him,
said the angel who appeared before him. She poked his chest with her pointing finger, and it was as hard and unyielding as steel, just like its owner.
You must shut the gateway before he gets here.
How do you know that? Who are you really? Arginil heard the rumors about a sleeping angel, but he never paid much attention to them, and he regretted that. Who was the sleeping angel? Was this woman her, or did she just borrow her name so she could pretend to be her? The book of names fluttered its wings. It still stretched across his chest like a tattoo, but it was more than ink. It was a magical gift too large for one young, naive angel to wield. So he shut it away inside a book, along with everything it ever told him. I don't remember why I put my ability to see the truth into a book and locked it away, but maybe it's time I reclaimed that power. If he did, then he'd stop feeling like half the angel he used to be. Arginil shoved her hand away as the book of names sank into his chest, sending all its power shooting up his neck into his eyes. They burned so brightly they lit the street. She shielded her eyes as she backed away.
What are you doing?
Finding out who you really are. Arginil looked at her with that gift, and it burned away all the artifice, laying bare her true name.
No, you can't do that.
She held both hands out like they could shield her from his sight. The street darkened until the only light came from her, and that light gathered into sigils that spelled out a name in violet light, confirming one thing at least. She hadn't lied about being an angel. She was an archangel, but not one he ever ran into in heaven. I already did, but he didn't understand what he saw. Your name is? She covered his mouth with both hands.
Don't say it. Don't even think it. Who I am doesn't matter. What I came to tell you matters a great deal to everyone all across time, space, and all of existence,
she said as that rumbling grew louder. Shouldn't your name have a few more vowels? Arginil stepped back so she didn't cover his mouth anymore. He still couldn't see what made that low, rumbling sound. What did you come to tell me? Maybe she was right. Her identity was a mystery he could solve some other time. So far, she hadn't given him a reason to distrust her. He just didn't like not knowing who she was or what she wanted.
I found out what his plan is. Do you know what a time crystal is?
She folded her arms. I just know what rumors say about it, but they don't exist. Arginil leaned against a building. Those crystals existed way back at the beginning and supposedly contained bits of the spark that ignited everything. Only legends remained from that time, when light light separated from darkness, and order formed out of chaos. From those primal forces, all else sprang into being.
Yeah, well, I didn't think they existed either until you know who showed up with one. He plans to gather all the shattered bits of those time crystals in one place and compress everything back down to a singular point in time and space so he can destroy it.
She pressed the heels of her hands to her forehead like she had a headache. If you're right, how can we stop him? Arginil stared at his hands. What could he do to stop this? I'm just one angel.
Close the gateway. The only place where his plan could work is the gray between, because it already connects to every realm. I can only imagine that benighted place would magnify the spell or the artifact or whatever he plans to use to pull this off.
What about those crystals? We can't leave them out there for someone to trip over, nor could he search for them. He belonged in the library.
I don't know. You can't gather them all together because they'd be too dangerous. I don't even know if you could move them without harming all creation.
She let her hands drop to her sides. Her violet eyes widened as she stared off like she was looking at something happening elsewhere. Can someone destroy those crystals? Not him, though. Arginil didn't know if he could leave hell. Did the ban of heaven which fell on all the other fallen affect him too? It must. I chose to fall. He gripped his upper arms and wished Thaniel was here for this. She could leave whenever she wanted.
I don't know, they hold part of creation. Could you destroy a piece of that?
She glanced at him. Arginil reeled at the suggestion. No, I couldn't destroy that. His angelic nature would never allow it. He was created to defend creation, not destroy it.
And there's your answer.
She shrugged.
You should go now before it's too late.
Right. I have to get rid of the gateway. How the hell do you take down a gateway? Arginil asked the empty street because she'd already vanished. Great, he must figure that out alone. Arginil hunched his shoulders and glanced around for the gateway. He lost track of it during their chat, and now he was all turned around. It took only a moment to spot the eye-shaped glow to his left, but there were many blocks between him and it still. He wasn't a fool. Even with his gift of true sight restored, there was no way he'd see a way to collapse the gateway just by looking at it, not when he didn't know how such a thing was created. He was too much of a realist to hope for that. And I'm no mage. I can look into the unseen and pull out the truth. Such dark thoughts accompanied him as he climbed up the side of a building until he was high enough that if he let go, he could just glide to his destination. The thought of those crystals scattered all across existence made him shudder. Something must be done about that, but not by me. Arginil let go and spread his wings. They caught the wind and carried him toward the gateway until lightning arced up from the ground and struck his left wing, knocking him off course. Pain shot through his shoulder as he tried to pull out of a dive before he struck the roof dead ahead, but his left wing no longer reacted to his mental commands. This will hurt! Arginil plowed into the roof and skidded to a halt as darkness claimed him.
Is that it?
Thaniel asked like she expected there to be more to it. Yes. Natali slipped from her grasp and pulled their veil back in place to hide their face so the angel wouldn't notice their form changed. Usually the Versati had more control than this, but they just didn't know what form to take. What would help in this situation? Arginil's likeness appeared in their mind's eye and they bit back a sigh of frustration. He was so haunted and the most alluring humanoid Natali ever met, and their body reshaped itself under their robes as it tried to find a form he'd find pleasing. What's wrong with me? I've seduced handsome humanoids before, and they drained them, but none affected them like he did.
Are you okay?
Daniel rocked back on her heels. Yeah, let's find Arginil. Just saying his name sent a pleasant thrill through Natali as they strode away. Daniel grabbed their arm and yanked them to a stop.
Then you'd better look up.
She pointed with her free hand at a winged silhouette against the darkening orange sky. Oh no, he's heading for the roof. He'll crash if he doesn't pull up. Natali wrenched their arm free and ran toward the falling angel and the building he might crash land on.
You find the building. I'll try to reach him before he crashes and slow him down.
When she didn't fly over Natali as the Versati glanced back. Is something wrong? Daniel stomped her foot and glared at the ground like it did something to offend her.
I can't summon my wings. What did you do to me?
Nothing. I just took a sip of your energy, that's all. I swear it. Natali backed away with their hands up as the angel stalked toward her and rolled up her sleeves. Daniel stopped a foot away and cocked her head to one side like she was listening to a distant voice.
Wait, I think Argia said something about the angels who fell, losing their wings in the fall. I wonder if that could be why my wings won't come out of storage.
Daniel tapped her chin. That sounds logical, and it would explain why he freaked out when you suggested he send his wings away, but now really wasn't the time to to discuss this. Natalie backed away and jerked their thumb at the spot where they last saw Arginil before losing him in the crowded skyline. Can we talk about this after we find him? He may be hurt and in need of healing, and that was something Natalie could help with, even though their powers weren't meant for that.
You're right. He's this way.
Danielle strode past Natalie, but their longer strides quickly left the Versailles behind. No matter, Natalie felt as light as the cooling night air as they ran to catch up. Just the thought of laying hands on that angsty angel again energized Natalie like nothing else and lengthened their legs, making it easier to keep pace with Thaniel. He's so perfect. The building was further than it looked, but Natalie took the stairs 3 at a time to the roof. If Thaniel noticed their increase in height and musculature, she didn't say anything. I don't need to hide what I am. She already knows I can change shape. I just haven't done so around her before. They had only just met, but Natalie liked the angel a lot already. I hope we can be friends after this. Natalie pushed up the trapdoor to the roof and climbed out. Arginil lay on his stomach like a broken doll, with one wing twisted under him and the other draped over his back.
Don't worry, angels are hard to damage.
Daniel shoved them gently aside so she could climb up beside them. I'll see what I can do. Natalie hurried to his side and sat cross-legged beside him on the flat roof.
Angels weren't created to be flesh and blood. We're made of spirit and light.
Daniel crouched on his other side, but she didn't touch him. Natalie appreciated that, as they rested a hand on his back and felt his muscles through the thin fabric of his robe. What are you saying? Because Arginil was flesh and blood here in hell. Everyone who dwelled here was. Daniel shrugged.
I'm just saying these wounds are only temporary. They'll disappear if he leaves here because physical objects can't harm our spirits or our light.
But he doesn't want to leave here, and Natalie didn't want him to go either, but they kept that to themselves as they extended their flesh-shaping magic into him, seeking muscles, bones, and anything else he may have damaged. Don't worry, I'll fix you.
True, but we don't always know what's best for us.
Thaniel signaled for silence as she rose.
Shh, I heard something.
She padded over to the low wall enclosing the roof and scanned the streets around them and grinned, like someone just gave her a present. What do you see? Natalie ran their hand gently over his wing and marveled at how soft it was. Under their hand, a hairline fracture glowed to their other sight.
A guy wearing a crown dismounting from a chariot pulled by some kind of beast made of fire and a lot of fallen angels.
Daniel hopped up onto the low wall. What are you doing? Natalie sent energy into the fracture and willed it to heal.
Causing trouble. Tell him to join me when he's on his feet again.
Daniel winked, then jumped over the edge. Wait, the illusion is gone. Natalie rushed to the wall, but Thaniel had already landed on the street and plucked a flaming sword out of the air. I hope you know what you're doing. Thaniel waved. So she heard that. As Thaniel jogged toward the fallen angels in between her and the gateway, she shined like a diamond in the sunlight, but the shine diminished after it armored her. Thaniel waved again, then put her head down and charged toward the fallen angels, but her boots didn't make a sound. Not a single one of the fallen turned to glance at her until she crashed into 2 fallen angels and knocked them to the ground, then ran over them. She swung her sword and slashed first to the left, then to the right. She spun with her swords out, cutting down creatures who used to be just like her before they fell. You're such a crazy angel, but I like your spunk. Natalie laughed and shook their head as they hurried back to Arginil. Thaniel was tough, but there were more than 100 fallen angels at least. No way could she fight them all, but she'd probably try, and we'll back you up as soon as we can. Leave a few for us.
You've been listening to Part 8 of Summon the Gods, Book 2 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy by Melinda Kucsera. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when the sequel publishes. The Rogue Gods Trilogy is available as an ebook and paperback, and now a full-cast audiobook. Click the link in the description to order your copy. If you love the Rogue Gods Trilogy, then you'll love Melinda's other epic fantasy adventure books too. They're just as full of magic and mayhem and characters who will do anything to achieve their goals. Check them out at the link in the description, and while you're there, sign up for her newsletter so her characters can talk directly to you. Thank you for listening.